Hello and welcome to this week's IG Live. We have a great interview coming up for you. We are going to be talking to author and illustrator Adria Karlsson about their picture book, My Sister Daisy, which is a perfect read for Pride Month. It's all about how to support someone who is trans. It's written really about a sibling who is finding out about their sibling. And so it's a really great book to help kids work through their emotions and learn how to be supportive. And it really models a lot of that behavior for us. And I also wanted to remind you that I'm also wanting to remind you that we have our giveaway. We are starting to do weekly giveaways, so if you haven't entered yet, make sure to go to our pinned post. Today is the last day to enter, and it's a special Juneteenth giveaway since today's Juneteenth of this book, They Built Me for Freedom by Tanya Duncan Ellis. So make sure to enter that. It's very easy to enter, and we're going to be doing one of these every week. We have another one next week, which will be for a special Pride Month giveaway, so don't miss that. And that's just another way, of course, to try and support all of these wonderful authors and illustrators that we all love and support diverse children's books. So again, we're going to be talking today to Adria Karlsson, who I think is got them here coming up. And that we're going to be talking about their book, My Sister Daisy. And if any of you are new to Read Your World, we are a nonprofit. And so any of your support, any donations are very much appreciated. We are here to help promote diverse books for kids and teens, and to support authors, illustrators, and other creators and publishers. And as part of that, we come to you usually every week. We had to take a few weeks off just recently, but we usually come here every week. And actually for the next several weeks, we're going to be having 2 a week because I'm trying to catch up for when I had to be out of town. So keep an eye out for those announcements. And it looks like Adria, I just got a notification you are unable to join. Let me try again. Sometimes we can just try it again. Sometimes it's Instagram being glitchy. Oh, good. Hi, nice to see you.
Hey, thank you. Apparently I did everything except set up settings so that microphone was available to Instagram.
Oh, well, I'm glad it worked out. You figured it out.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for being here. As I was mentioning, we try to do this every week, and I'm excited to talk to you about your book. So thank you for being here.
I'm really excited to be here. It's a great opportunity. Thank you.
Well, let's go ahead and jump in, and you can tell us what was your journey to becoming an author, because from looking at your bio that you have on the website, it seems like you had kind of an interesting path to that.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely didn't think I would see myself in this position ever. I've always been a lover of children's books. I was the 14-year-old who babysat and then used my babysitting money to buy picture books because I just loved them so much. And so it's always been an interest, but I didn't realize I could do it as a profession. And so I was a teacher for a long time. I was a tutor for dyslexic kids. I ended up doing dog and cat behavior and running a training business for a while, 7 years in there. And then around the time my 5th kid was born, I had this idea for a story that felt really important to our family, and I wrote it out and was like, oh, I think there actually is something here. And through various assists, through people that knew something about it, managed to get it into the hands of my agent at the time, and got to do this. And so I feel like I've spent the last 5 years actually catching up on how to be an author and how to make this an actual career, because it was not an anticipated step for me prior to that. But
well, let's talk about the story. My Sister Daisy. Tell us about the book for those who haven't read it, although I think probably a lot of people who are watching have that. Go ahead, tell us about it and what inspired it.
Sure. So I have it here. So My Sister Daisy is a book that's told from the perspective of the older cis sibling of a trans girl. And they're really close in age. As he says in the beginning, I was still little when you were born. And it essentially was a book that filled a niche for me that existed, where I wanted my kids to be able to talk about the fact that when things change, life can be hard or can be confusing or whatever, but it also can be celebratory. And so it tells the journey of the older siblings' kind of understanding or growth of understanding around his younger sister's identity. Because while he's accepting and the family is accepting right from the start, it's still a change. And for a 6 or 7 year old in that position, like change can be scary. And what does it mean? And I wanted a book like that to exist. Spoiler alert, turns out Daisy is still the same person she's always been, and they can keep being friends. So it's, you know, it's a story that's very much an internal journey, I think, for the primary character. But
Well, I think one thing I read that you had said in an interview that you were looking for that there were other books sort of about this topic, but they were different. Like a lot of times it's about the trans kid experience, either from their perspective or about the family not being supportive, maybe experiencing bullying. So you wanted something that really modeled, how to be supportive and
yeah,
how to be positive and yet still recognize the fact that this it means a lot of change or potentially a lot of change. So
yeah.
how does your book help kind of model that support with curiosity?
So I think that there were a number of books that we reached for at the time, because this came after one of my first child or second child came out as trans. And a lot of the books that we reached for showed them that they could be who they were and they could share who they were with the world, and that was great. But first they would have to go through being told they weren't that, and being told that they couldn't be that, and being told that was strange or scary or something, before we could get to the acceptance part. And I really wanted a book that took what my experience was with my child and, with so many of my friends' kids, which is, we are totally here for you. No one's going to tell you you can't be. But also, I've never parented this before, and for my other kids, like they had never been through, like knowing someone who had transitioned, like socially transitioned before, and so like there were questions, but I don't think that questions always indicate rejection. And I think that up until around the time my book came out, which was, it also was accompanied by several other books, I think, that came out around the same time, that really modeled that it can start from acceptance and curiosity, but also like I said, change can be hard. And I think, while we always want to center the trans child's story, I did feel like there were books that were being written from the perspective of the trans kid. And the reality is that when you're part of a family ecosystem, even though we want to center the story of a trans kid during their transition, there are other people involved in that moment, and there are other kids involved in that moment, and their journey and their understanding of themselves in that family dynamic or that family ecosystem is just as valid. um, and so it was an interesting challenge to write a story that celebrated and centered a trans child and their journey, because wow, how cool that, Daisy could share that and come out, and like I never want to take anything away from the joy of that or the specialness of that. And also at the same time recognize that there are other parts to this story too, and they also deserve celebration. And this brother, is accepting, but also has really valid other feelings. And that journey is also really important. And in the end, comes out with, the same conclusion we want everyone to come to, which is these are the people we've known, and we're so lucky to be able to understand them better. Um, so yeah, it both was partly looking at it, who else is in this ecosystem, who else's stories haven't we seen yet, and also, how can we start from acceptance? So I don't, and I honestly, at the time, I still was under the misconception that I was a cis straight person. And so I was very worried about coming out with a story about a trans kid, because I didn't want to take a space in the industry that a trans author could be published in. Now that's no longer an issue, since partly through the journey of this book, I've come to understand my own non-binary identity. But it was a really kind of a relief once I got into doing book talks and realizing, again, I was so new to the author thing, but to realize that I had told the story from not the trans child's perspective, because that wasn't at the time where I understood my understanding to lie. And so, yeah, it was, I can't
Oh, that's
remember
so,
if I got
yeah,
all the
I love
parts of
it.
your question.
Well, no,
Sorry.
I love it because I mean, well, there's a lot to unpack in what you said, but one of the things I think is so cool is that the book itself, writing the book, helped you on your own journey, which I think is really cool, and also the part I think is really important what you were talking about validating the siblings' emotions, but and recognizing it is a big change for them, and might be I don't know, like can you talk a little bit more about that, how the book really helps it validate those emotions and say, okay, that's normal. It's okay to feel how you're feeling when this is going on.
Yeah, I mean, I think that especially, kind of up until that point, because the siblings in so many of these books had been kind of almost the villains. Not in every book, but there were a fair number where it felt like the siblings were the ones most against the transition of the trans kid. Um, it was really hard for my other kids in that moment to see themselves in any of these stories.
Mm.
And then I think that the narrative has started to change kind of around accepting that parents and other relations also go through a moment of grieving kind of the potential of who they thought this person was and who they actually are, and coming to that point of celebrating that that potential person never existed. And in fact, now we just get this wonderful, authentic human being.
Mm.
But there was a lot of resistance, I feel like, when this was happening to kind of siblings or parents having anything other than celebratory feelings.
Right.
And I think that that's oftentimes because it was equated with rejection or
Mm.
with non-acceptance. And so I think that kind of, like you said, celebrating or validating the emotions around other people felt really important to me, because those stories were also part of my life. I was also having these conversations with the siblings, and they were having real feelings of, but this was a set we were part of. These are the relationships we thought we had. Like, at 6 years old, 7 years old, you change a name or a title on a person, and it's like, well, are they still my, are they still whoever? Are they still my friend? Are they still my sibling? Um, and that's because kids and people in general, I think change is hard. But that I think that not talking about those feelings doesn't make them go away. It often just creates either resentment or silencing or things like that. Whereas if you can work through that process of, you know, something has been lost, but to get to the realization of nothing has been lost. In fact,
Mm.
all has been gained. Like,
Mhm.
that person was never going to exist in the mold you thought they were. And it honestly, like, I think it also sets such an amazing precedent for kids in general, whether my other kids, as they've moved, as they've grown up, and, honestly, identities have shifted and pronouns have shifted, but also their interests have shifted, and what they want to do when they grow up, or who they want to be, or who they want their friends to be. And like being able to accept that as a parent without that initial, but that's not what I thought it was going to happen. Like letting go of those futures in a way, and kind of getting to see these people grow into who they are, has been so exceptional. And I feel like if I hadn't had that moment to kind of work through those other feelings, maybe I wouldn't have gotten there, right? It would have
Right.
just been, no, I don't want to think about it. so so I
Oh,
think the book, while it's written for children and while it is a picture books always have a dual audience of both the kids that are being read to, but the people that are reading them. And so much of what the heart of this story is, I think, is for those adults, whether they're grandparents or guardians or caretakers or parents themselves or aunts or uncles or whoever. The story is also for them to be acknowledged, because I think that the feelings that the sibling has also mirror those of the adults in a lot of kids' lives. But
and so what do your kids think about the book?
they love it. They're super proud of it. They think it's so cool, which is really validating for me as an adult. Really love when my kids are proud of me.
Yeah.
Um, and I think that for all of us has laid such a foundation of conversation,
Mhm.
where even now they go back and they're like, well, mom, you said in my sister Daisy, or and it's like, it's really fun to see that. And they go back and they will claim parts of it as their story, when in fact it's fictionalized, and these
Right.
things may or may not have been part of their life. But
Right.
Linus Curci is the illustrator. I want to make sure I mention that. But so much of Linus's art does mirror toys they had or experiences they had, or even our hound dog. It's not actually, it's Linus's dog, but like my kids see it as this is
That's
part of
there.
my story.
I
So
love
yeah. And I think, kind of piggybacking on it, sorry, writing about a story inspired by my kids was always a little bit of um, an anxiety provoking moment for me, because I think it puts them out in the world that as children, they may not have the choice whether or not to be out in the world and to be part of the conversation. And that's something that I've taken really put a lot of thought into since the book came out, prior to it coming out, and even now. And it makes me really happy that they do still feel so proud that it's out there and that they're part of the conversation, and that they could do this thing that might
it.
reach other trans kids. Because I dread the day, that if they could potentially end up feeling resentful or unhappy about it, like that would be heartbreaking. But it's a risk we take when we involve any part of our personal lives or our families, I think, in these stories. And so it's really nice that they still all feel so positively about its impact in the world and its existence. So,
Definitely. Well, I imagine that the feedback, I'm sure you've gotten a lot of positive feedback about the book. That must help too. I mean, what kind of reactions have you gotten from readers?
oh, it's so nice. Like it honestly, like it's so incredibly rewarding when I hear from parents or hear from kids that they picked up the book and it's like our family or it's like our story or and it's just it's such a special thing to know that you've reached a family. And I've had a couple instances of parents in tears because they finally like saw something that really resonated. And it's I got a letter at one point, an email from someone who was like, oh my God, we found this at the library and my kiddo's named Daisy. And she was so excited to find herself in a book with her same name. And it's like, how special is that? Like, and so I think it's hard sometimes when you look at publishing and being in publishing and like how many books have we sold or how many, like I'm 3.5 years out from this book now, like will it stay in print? Like all those kinds of questions. And so it's each of those experiences is so reinforcing because even if it is only one family or one kid or one adult that finds their life affirmed or changed or reinforced because of it, it really does make such a big difference to me as an author, just putting this out in the world and reinforces the importance of these books. But
Well, one of the things I love that you said that you love being an author or illustrator because you got to spend your time asking questions, figuring out answers, and sharing what you've learned through make believe. So, as part of that, what do you think the biggest lessons are that you want to share with kids? Well, or kids or adults. Maybe I'll just say your readers.
um, I think one of the most surprising and life-altering lessons I've learned is that when you write, authenticity is really, really important.
Mm.
Um, and part of the reason I came through my own understanding of myself was that talking to readers about this book, there was a ring of inauthenticity to myself when I introduced myself as a cis person that
Mm.
suddenly became very prominent in my life because I had to talk about it.
Right.
Um, and I think that with all of my work, I always want to affirm children. Like that to me is so like it's just so important that their feelings are real, that their lives are real. It's not they're waiting to grow up and they're in some sort of make believe like pretend self at this point. Like they're all real people even if they're on different developmental moments in their lives. um and I think that trying to write books that do that genuinely and not in a saccharine or
Right.
fake sort of way requires real authenticity. And that I have found that my stories really do shine most when I bring that to them. I might start with one idea, but the story very soon will push back and turn into what it needs to be. And if I follow that and listen to that and hear what these characters are telling me they need to be, it's going to be a much stronger book than if I try to make it into what I at first thought it should be. Just, yeah.
Yeah. And you also mentioned, that you like to share these lessons through make believe. What is it about make believe in storytelling that makes it such a great vehicle to kind of share these lessons, especially with kids?
And I think it's everyone needs these lessons. We need this affirmation, whatever it is, but we're also people and
Mhm.
kids, especially, I think, like things that are fun and like things that take them somewhere else or do, introduce them to something they haven't thought about or play with a sense of like whimsy or imagination that, you didn't come up with yourself. Like it's really fun to see that. And I think that the books that are most impactful oftentimes are the books that my kids go back to over and over again are those ones that are funny or silly or fantastical or magical. And it's this book for me is, I mean, obviously it's realistic fiction, like Daisy is not living in a fantastical world. But it's really fun to take things that kids wouldn't normally experience
Mhm.
and hook them with that kind of like, wait, what? Or a sense of fun. And then deep underneath, tuck in that, those deeper meanings, those themes, those pieces that you really want them to learn and grow from too, or hopefully find themselves in.
And so why are books like yours so important, especially, I mean, they're always important, but especially this moment we're living in now? Why is it so important for kids to have access to books like yours? I mean, you
Oh
mentioned about a reader telling you that they found it in their local library, which
God.
is great because we know a lot of
That's
times
right.
it's not.
um, I mean, I don't know like if it can be overstated at this point, like especially assuming you follow news at all, like with the Scarametti ruling yesterday being so heartbreaking and taking healthcare options away from so many trans kids throughout the country. And granted, kids Daisy's age are not mostly accessing any kind of healthcare things, but as a parent, especially when your child first transitions, it's like, oh my God, what does this mean? You go and you Google, and it's like, oh, I need to find out how to support them, how to do this. And even if you don't access any kind of healthcare for 6 or 10 or maybe ever years, the fact that it might not be available, I like the
Right.
fear of that is so very real. And I think that the invalidation inherent in that, telling us these kids don't know or don't understand or don't need, and it's, when you're surrounded by that in the real world, day in and day out, even with, newspaper outlets or, news outlets or whatever that are progressive or liberal saying, oh, we're asking for too much, or these,
Right.
these kids are too little. Again, like it keeps going back to invalidating these children.
Mm.
And it's so heartbreaking. And so having a book, sorry, to go back to, that is affirming of not just the child's journey and identity, but also like how to be an affirming person without having to kind of hedge because that's what the world is telling you to do, or to doubt your child because that's what everyone is like, that's what the media conscience is kind of saying.
Right.
Is so important. And I think that there's one thing to have books for adults, but again, having a read aloud book, having a picture book that can be on display at a library, that can be picked up by any adult, that is read with the child. So the child is hearing these words coming from the adult that they're reading it with.
Mhm.
Um, and that the adult then has these phrases to go back to of, I hear
Right.
you, I see you, I validate you. Um, I think is just such important literature to have out there right now, for everyone involved, because it's really remaining strong as an adult for these kids when everyone is telling you that you're wrong or you're asking for too much or they're just, is unbelievable in some way. It's like, no, like talk to the trans people of the world, talk to the adults out there, talk to people that have been through this journey. And it's like, this
Right.
is not, they're not too little, they're not too young. We all have a sense of who we are from early on. That's part of what makes it remarkable that, society has managed to quash this for so long, and that these kids now have a voice is so special. um, and so I think that, yeah, I'm part of Authors Against Banned Books, and I love what they're doing. And yeah, and I love how much they're working to protect specifically libraries and schools and access to this, because without them, we go back to not having words for these things. We go back to kids
Right.
not being able to voice what feels different. And it's a really sad world to contemplate. And so I think the more we can get these books into the hands of people that need them, and which I think is everybody, I think the more we can kind of combat that national narrative around kids not knowing or these books being too out there.
Well, that actually leads to my next question because what would you say to people who think that kids are too young to be having these conversations? That they're like you said. I mean, that's something we hear a lot. Is like, oh, they don't really understand yet. They're not ready for this. They're too young. Like you're pushing an agenda. What would you say to those people?
I mean, have they asked their cis kids? Like, I feel like that's the largest kind of piece that's missing from this narrative, is that we never doubt the cis kids that are out there saying, well, I'm a boy, so I can't do that, or I don't want to dress that way, or I want to be perceived the same as my peers who are boys. I want to be on the boys' team. I'm not going in the girls' room. Like, these are phrases that come out of cis kids' mouths constantly. We have no question around their sense of identity when
Mhm.
it comes down to these gender norms that
Right.
we've created as a society. And yet, as soon as somebody says something different than we expected, it's, oh, you don't understand.
Mm.
And so it's like, it's one of those, it really comes home to me every time I step into a group of kids, and you go out on the playground and they've self-segregated into these groups oftentimes, even with kids that I know around here are raised in very gender, aware households and schools and everything else. It's, you still see it. The girls tend to group up with the girls, the boys tend to group up with the boys, because that's where our, everything in our society is kind of pushing them towards, and it's where they find their affirmation of their identity. It's where they find the people they feel like and feel comfortable with. And so why, as soon as a kid tells us something that is just as real and just as true, and oftentimes exactly the same phrase as a cis kid would work, it would say, we say, oh, you can't possibly understand that. And
Mhm.
it's really wild to me that it's such a divergence. But
Right.
yeah, I don't know exactly what I would say to them though, because it really is such a special thing when a kid will share this with you. Like, I
Mhm.
am so happy to be the parent of a trans kid,
Right.
partly because it means that there was there was a conduit of communication there, that
Right.
my kid felt comfortable sharing that. And whether that
There's a
was
sense of safe.
me or our family or their
Right.
community or whatever it is, like they were excited to share that. And that
Yeah.
is such a special feeling. And whenever someone tells me, oh yeah, my kid told me X, I'm like, congratulations. Like, it must be amazing to be a parent that a kid would feel excited to share that with.
Mm.
Because it, if they don't and they are, like, then what other elements are keeping them quiet? And it's really exciting to know that this was something that my kids wanted to share. And I hope that other people feel that celebration, because it really is special. But
That's such a beautiful perspective. I think especially with everything that's going on now, to still retain that sense of joy and celebration and support and affirmation is just so special.
well, and I think there's an element too where people are like, well, aren't you worried about them growing up in a world like this? And I'm like, I'm
Mhm.
actually not, because I mean, I am on many levels, but I'm not worried about them as people, because I feel like to be in tune with your identity and have put
Mhm.
that much thought into it already, even if it shifts, even if it changes, like you're having that conversation with yourself already, which
Mhm.
is so powerful. And I think the best communities I know, oftentimes the most authentic, real, warm, and caring communities, are the LGBTQ communities that
Yeah.
I am part of, because there are people that have done this work, that have been
Right.
doing this thinking and fighting these fights. And I'm so excited for my kids to be a part of that world. And
Mhm.
so it's like, yes, there's so many things that could be perceived as negative, but
Mhm.
how exciting for them to know that there's this whole community out there just like waiting for them at whatever stage they're at. Um, and it's such a wonderful place to be.
Well,
So,
thank you for coming and sharing this with us. I think this is such an important conversation to have, and I'm so honored to be able to talk with you about it today. Again, this is My Sister Daisy. For those who haven't read it yet, go out, get a copy, check it out from the library, make sure they know how much people want to read it. And just to close up, I'm curious, like, do you have other projects that you're working on that are going to be coming out, or things that you're thinking about?
I do. Can I share one other thing first?
Oh, sure, sure.
Especially because it's Juneteenth, and I feel like obviously that's a day to be celebrated, and I want to make sure that I call out some amazing books by Black authors on today. Is that all right?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you.
All right. I wanted to share Marley's Pride
Yes.
by Joelle Retner and Deanne Wiley's the illustrator. Calvin by J.R. and Vanessa. Um, by J.R. and Vanessa Ford, illustrated by Kayla Harris.
Oh, I think we just lost your audio. Hold on. We just lost your audio for a second, I think.
Now, can you hear me?
Yes. Perfect.
Sorry. Born Ready is another one about a Black trans child, by Jodi Patterson, illustrated by Charnel Pinckney Barlow. And then the which I adore is My Rainbow by Trinity and Dashana Neal, illustrated by Art Twink. So I didn't want to miss doing that,
No, thank you for that.
especially today.
Oh, I think we lost your audio
No,
again.
I'm sorry. I'm here.
Okay.
I was getting a phone call, but I'm on Do Not Disturb, but apparently it's because it's one of my kids and they get to call through.
Oh,
Um, sorry about that.
no, that's
Um, And the last, yeah, so in terms of future projects for me, I have a middle grade rom-com about a nerdy girl who adores the romanticism around animal courtship behaviors, and keeps trying to write sonnets that turn into limericks, and she's very disappointed by that. Um, that's middle grade, and it's in process. And I have a couple historical fiction novels, one about a trans newsie, one about a geeky science girl from the 1880s, that are in various steps of the process. And picture books, I can't like. I love writing picture books. So I have all kinds of nonfiction and fiction, but nothing yet currently slated to publish. But they're all in the process.
A lot in the works. Well, we're excited to see that. I mean, especially historical fiction. That's my sweet spot. But we
And
any
spoiler alert, these kids have always existed.
yeah. Well, thank you for coming and sharing this with us. And when we see any projects coming out, we'll be sure to share about those with our audience. And anybody who's watching, as always, this will be up on Instagram in a few minutes. Or if you missed the beginning, we're also going to have it up on YouTube. And don't forget to enter our Juneteenth giveaway. Today is the last day. It ends tonight at midnight. So be sure so you can win a copy of They Built Me for Freedom by Tanya Duncan Ellis. And what a pleasure to talk with you today. Thank you for taking the time to come on.
That's great. Thank you so much.
Thanks. Bye, everybody.
Bye.